The Bridge.
How do I start this? Do you have any ideas? Hey everybody and welcome. You are watching, listening, you're here. You're present and you're watching The Bridge. This is the best in indie Arabic music show on the internet. I'd like to think that it is. I don't know. Barafish. We'll see. My name is Ivan Saba, and I've been a radio host for the last 8 years, dealing specifically and concentrating on indie Arabic music and its effect and the sounds and the different revolutions and just the all-around greatness of this music scene that is so complex and so intense. And I love it. I'm always surprised by it every other time. My connection to it is, of course, my identity. I'm Palestinian American. I'm Arab, I'm Christian, and I live in Israel. It's weird. It's really complicated, and there's a lot going on. But I feel like the music really connects me to everything, to all of these complex feelings, and helps me interpret it. And with that being said, the first episode of this podcast is going to sound pretty weird to you, but I've got Ryan Milov Cordoba, aka Call Me Cordoba, on the show today. He is an All-American singer, producer, teacher, and PhD candidate living in Brooklyn, New York. And this guy just covers in Arabic. Yeah, you heard me right. Covers in Arabic. Now, my Arabic isn't great. I mean, it's okay. I mean, I get along. I speak to my parents. I make a lot of mistakes. But I would never think about covering music in Arabic. And I think that's what's kind of insanely interesting about this guy. And I think you're really going to enjoy this. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed speaking to Ryan, and I hope that all of you go check out his covers and his music, and of course follow him on Instagram. But let's get to the point. The podcast. This is the first episode, and it's an Arabic music show, and I brought you an American. Just listen. It's going to be fun. It's quite a twist. So without further ado, I really jump into the question and we just go straight into it. Enjoy. It's really funny how somebody who has completely no connection to the Middle East whatsoever kind of decides, okay, I'll start doing covers in Arabic. And it's like, I'm really curious about how that started. Like, how is that something that, how do you, like, what's the process? Talk me through it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the process for each song is a little different, but in terms of how it started overall, I think it basically started on a trip. Or this funny thing that happened on 2 trips. I've gotten to do 2 kind of Arabic intensives abroad. One was 8 weeks and one was 5 weeks. They were separated by years. The first one was in Granada, actually, with a community of Moroccans, which is why the first Amia that I started learning was Derija. And from the beginning, my teachers were showing me music. And I think that was just lucky. I think they weren't worried that I didn't understand the words. They knew that I was a musician, and they just thought, we'll just show this to them and who knows what will happen. And by the end of that, I had started arranging a acoustic version of this Ahmed Chowki song called Kaina Willa Mekainash. It's like a song about, the problems of love in our day. And I remember my teacher, a man named Nizar Limlahi, telling me 2 months of Derija and you're singing. This is, you should consider, noticing this and continuing. And he was also a musician, so that was a nice way for us to connect. Then 2 years later, I got to do a 5-week intensive in Rabat. And I went on a trip to the desert in the south. I was at a language center called Qalam Mulawh, and they arranged weekend trips to various parts of Morocco. And there was one to the Sahara that was definitely too short. It was 3 days from Rabat down to the Sahara and back, which basically means you get to spend one night in the Sahara. But of course, I had to go see the desert, so I did it. And while I was down there, I got to see my first Gnawa show. Gnawa is a type of music that's connected to the indigenous North African cultures who were there before Islam and then converted to Islam and blends Islamic elements and pre-Islamic elements. And we saw this, you know, it's basically like an indie Gnawa show right on the edge of the desert. And I was immediately gripped by it, especially the rhythms, but also the whole kind of community vibe. I later learned it's connected to Sufi music and has a real spiritual element. So I left the desert, and then of course after that show, I'm sleeping in the desert, which is, you know, kind of this. It's kind of a spiritual thing in and of itself, or it's supposed to be. When it's 125 degrees and you're not sleeping, it's not that spiritual, it turns out. But the idea is that you're kind of out there. You know, the desert's very much about like an exposed landscape. And I think one of the things that people sometimes find on desert trips is that they themselves feel more naked in the desert.
Everything's out in the open.
Yeah, because everything's out in the open. So anyway, that was part one. And that's the connection to like an example of traditional Islamic music, right? Mm-hmm. Although in Morocco, I learned from my teachers that it's very popular in Moroccan music to blend Gnawa music with other forms, usually of kind of independent contemporary music. Mm-hmm. Then we're on a bus ride back through a very different landscape. No longer desert, more urban, even a little bit of kind of green and mountains. And a song comes on the radio, and it's this song called Zina, which I had never heard before. And he got to the chorus in the song, you know, hey Zina, ma dirti fina, ana wa qalbi hawsna alik ma lqina. And that was the first time that I ever understood something, the first time I heard it in a song in Arabic. And I thought, well, I guess it's a little bit like when you realize something that you thought might be possible was actually going to be possible. Like I had learned enough Arabic that I could see that I could actually do this. I could do the thing that I had started to do 2 years ago, which was take a big step into Arabic language music. And so when I got back to Rabat, I put together a version of that just for the school, just to show them. I didn't record it or anything, but I performed it for the school. And people really liked it. And that stayed with me. I thought, wow, here at this language center, we have people from all over the world. It's not just Moroccans, but it's like people who've come to learn Arabic from all over the world. And something about seeing somebody who has no connection with this world learning this music resonates. اليوم راني معك غدوة تاني متمني يكتب المكتوب ونكون هداك يا قلبي يشوف هواك وينرماني فوق البحر الصافي بمواج وداني معها تباري.
I mean, it's definitely something like that. Yeah. Yeah. It's like you were saying before in the stuff that you sent me, like it's bridging that gap, like, and having music as that sort of tool to do it essentially. Absolutely. Yeah. That was like one of the things that resonated with me the most. Like obviously the name of the show is The Bridge. Yeah, I noticed that too. That was part of why I reached out. I was like, I think we're gonna share some values. Probably. So like I was like, as I was telling you, for me, I had a hard time connecting to my culture. Like I came here not really knowing how I would fit in so much. I felt like a fish out of water, so to speak, like an American
Mm.
who knew a little bit of Arabic, who was made fun of mainly because she had an American accent when she spoke in Arabic.
Oof.
And I didn't find my place. Even at home,
Mm.
like my mom would be listening to Kulthum and like
Mm.
Fairuz and all these like really old school songs. And I was like sticking to like Foo Fighters and stuff. I couldn't care
Yeah,
so
exactly.
much of what she was listening. I was trying to rebel essentially at that time, like my whole period growing up here.
Mm.
And then I got to college and I was just like, okay, I'm the only Arab in a predominantly Jewish college.
Mm.
It's time to like, I started missing it. I started missing
Mm.
Arabic. I wanted that sort of, you know, that thing. And I started looking up a bunch of different songs and stuff like that. And I was trying to find something that fit the bill of what I was looking for. Because Kulthum is great and beautiful and
Mm.
everything. And it has its, you know, place and its respect, but it wasn't something that I could relate to in my sort of finding my identity, so to speak. So when I heard stuff like Dam, when I heard Jadal, when I heard Yasmin Hamdan, Mashroua Layla, all of these like
Those are
different
them.
groups
Yeah.
that like represented something that really resonated with me, I thought, okay, I can't be the only one that's only finding out about this now. I need to talk about this. I need to have a place. So I
Mm.
started the radio show about 8 years ago. It's been running
Wow.
since. And like I'm at a stage where playlists are nice and all, but
Yeah.
I want to like kick it up a notch. So it's really great talking to you because I get these stories and like create this sort of like podcast of essentially highlighting these stories and highlighting the effect that this music has on
Mm.
people, and not just Arab people. I think it's something that really does create that connection with others. And like you were saying, you found that place like quite literally through your journey. You went from like something that was more traditional and then slowly found your
Exactly.
way through Zena. And I think that story is absolutely beautiful. And I think that if I don't know if you ever spoke to the guys from Babylon, if they ever heard about this, but I think they would be so impressed because
Mm.
that song has been covered so many times
Yeah.
and so many languages in so many ways. And I don't think anyone has done what you did, which essentially like really put the respect that it
Mm.
requires. Because a lot of times people like they take different things and they sample songs, and you know we see it a lot in mainstream music where people sort of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
sample things and they don't know the background of it, but
That's right.
which is such an important thing when you're dealing with cultural and oriental even like pieces of work.
Definitely.
Was that something that you were kind of you know held you back, or because you do it in a very very respectful and authentic way, you really
Mm.
keep the
Oh, thank you.
integrity of the music there, which is something that not a lot of people do. um was that something that concerned you when you approached this sort of project, or or did it just happen organically and you kept that in your mind?
I think it's a little bit of both. The need to teach yourself about another culture as you engage with it is always on my mind, because for me, it comes down to a question of basic respect. I mean, if I want to work with something that somebody else created, the basic thing that I need to do is understand the story of that thing that they created. For me, covering Arabic music, that has many levels. The first of which is the Arabic. So part of the reason the style that I've developed for covering the Arabic music puts my voice with the Arabic in the center, not because it's the most important part, but because one of the most important parts of the work is trying to get the Arabic right, or as right as I can. I mean, I know that it's not perfect, but even to let it be clear that it's not perfect is a part of the process, right? Because I'm not Arab, so I'm not hiding that I'm not Arab. I'm not hiding that I'm learning Arabic. Another level is both kind of in terms of, I wish I could show you my desk right now, in terms of personality and in terms of training. I have a research orientation. So I'm in a PhD program at the City University of New York. Mm-hmm. And I have a few different cultures that I work with, but one of them is the medieval Islamic empire, let's say. So I'm used to looking into things that aren't my culture. So for example, when I'm covering, we could just say when I'm covering Brooklyn, there's all kinds of research that I do into it before I put together the finished product, whether it's about how are they producing it in terms of the instrumentation, what are the words referring to, and what do they say about the song. So for example, just these, I thought this would be useful, that as an example, I couldn't figure out a way to actually buy a hard copy of the album. The Music Direct said it was no longer available, and I actually only discovered Dom after Corona, so delivery services, especially international, were offline. I wanted to read the liner notes. I wanted to read what they said about their songs. So I did manage to find them. And what they said about Brooklyn was the following. They said, "This spoken word is about finding yourself regardless of where you are located. It is a story about Suhail, who decides to leave Palestine and move to New York. Soon enough, he finds himself creating his career and tying the knot with his love in a place so far away from home." And I thought, okay, this is them talking about it. So this is the frame that I can use to build my interpretation of it. And then the last piece I would say is when I interpret the song, I don't try to make it like the original. So I'm very happy that it comes off as working respectfully and authentically. But I actually think a part of that is that I'm not trying to make it too much like the original. This came up in a big way in covering Brooklyn because Brooklyn is such a personal story, right? He's telling such a personal story. And if I just say his words, it's weird because that's not my story, you know? So the central challenge of the interpretation was, how do I tell his story in a way that it's also clear that I'm telling it? Does that make sense? And that it's clear why I'm telling it. Now, those were the kind of goals I went into this with.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, after hearing that album and having, gone through every track, literally, that song, Brooklyn, which is funny because I had been obsessed with it. And I know that not a lot of people had, like, on my side of things, people are much more obsessed with, Emtan Josek Yamma and all of the, like, the bops, as the kids would say. Exactly. The songs that are like a lot more popular, I guess. But for me, Brooklyn is, as you said, it's such a personal story. It's something that I like wholeheartedly related to as somebody who did the opposite of what he did. And because I know Suhail as well, and I'm familiar with, and I've met his wife, and they're just like such wonderful people, and the work that they do is so important to our culture and to the story and the narrative of the Palestinian struggle. Culturally, they needed, like, it was such a heartfelt story, and I didn't think it received the respect or the I don't know how to even say it, like the admiration it deserved, at least. And for you to do that cover was so, like, I was like, wow, this guy doesn't even speak Arabic and he knows exactly how I'm feeling about this song. Somebody who understands me.
Oh, wow. I'm so glad. Yeah. So it's funny. I had a similar experience discovering Brooklyn. So I remember I discovered Dom in March. I was talking to a friend of mine who was on the Rabat trip with me about expanding my knowledge of Arabic language music. And she was like, the band that I'm just listening to over and over and over again all the time is Dom. Have you checked them out? And I was like, no. So I pulled up Ben Hana Mana and I just started listening from the beginning. And I was immediately, like, first of all, just smiling. Like, those bops are so fun. And it's as a musician, as somebody who produces music, I really, to generate a sound that's so immediately, I showed it to my undergraduates at Hunter College. I was like, do you guys know about Dom? And I played 10 seconds and they were like, where do we find their music? I mean, 10 seconds of Imtim Jawzig Yamma.
Yeah. It's a hit.
And then you move deeper into it and they start to talk about different issues, increasing complexity. Of course, I can't understand it all in the flow. I'm having to look at the translation as well. And then Brooklyn happens and it's just quiet. Suddenly there's quiet in a way that there isn't on the album. And that is what got my attention. I was like, why did they just quiet down? And the name of the song was Brooklet. And I was like, this is the song that I need to look at closely. This will be my way into this album.
كارتين في كل البيت، الصور اللي الهيت رتبتهم بالشنطة، غرف من بيني بعتذي يومها، مع كل هاد رح اشتاق للفترة ما أخذ معي وغناي تعرفوني بهالمشوار، بإيدي تذكرة بقلبي يا ريت واصلوني المطار.
I also felt very moved by the story of immigration, even though it's not my story. My family has been immigrating for generations. My mom immigrated from Venezuela, her father from the Basque Country in Spain, my grandmother on the other side from Ireland, and then the great-grandparents came from Ukraine. And not all of them were immigrations were let's say, forced or highly suggested immigrations, but about half of them were. My grandfather left the Basque Country when Franco was in power, and my Jewish great-grandparents left Ukraine when there were persecutions. And that, to me, combines with a situation. My mother didn't leave Venezuela because she had to. Mm-hmm. But since she's left, Venezuela has collapsed. So there is a way. I, for example, haven't been back to Venezuela in probably 13 years. And I don't know when I'll be able to go back. So these were the themes from my own life that I felt I could bring to a story of immigration. And something that I think is very key for me about Dom, and I learned this from watching them talk on interviews, it's actually, and it's a big theme on this album too. It's the theme of their song, the title track, Ben Hana Wemana, which I also didn't understand until I looked up the liner notes. So maybe I'll just read those, and that'll provide some context for this other piece of Dom that I really appreciate. So what they say about Ben Hana Wemana is, the album's title, Between Hana Wemana, is a well-known saying in the Arab world. It talks about a man who is married to two women. The young one is called Hana, and the older one is called Mana. Hana keeps plucking his white beard hair so he won't look so old, while Mana plucks his black beard hair so he won't look too young. As a result, the man ends up without a beard. While Dom tends toward a political stream, they lose the mainstream audience. And when they tend towards commercial, they lose their political audience. And I thought the song Brooklyn is a great example of finding a point of balance between those two audiences, because it's political in the sense that Suhail is talking about making a difficult choice that is a result of a political situation. But his choice is deeply personal in two ways. One, he's choosing an artistic path, and two, he's choosing a life partner. So I thought, so here we have the intersection of these two streams. And that was part of what made me think, as an American covering a Palestinian song, this was the perfect first one. Also, I live in Brooklyn. So I was going to say, I mean, immediately I started thinking about the visual story.
It really fits.
Yeah.
That's excellent. I mean, I don't know what else to say after that. You hit it straight on the, and I think, like you said, like this album, Ben Hana Wemana, was like, it's like neither here nor there. They talk about everything and how they don't fit in all these different places. And it's so heard in throughout the songs, whether they're, like even in Amtan Jawzak Yamma, which is something that's supposed to be like really funny and kind of a play on the whole saying that I hear almost on the daily. Yeah. Not from my parents, but in general, like from relatives and stuff, being a single woman and a Palestinian single woman, it's like, it's one of those things where I constantly hear all the time and it gets really annoying. But it's like, it's gone to a point where people are playing it at their weddings. Like the irony of that.
Yeah.
It's just so,
as well.
Like people don't actually they're laughing at you guys. Like, hello.
Yeah. I've seen the reposts on Instagram and I'm like, I'm an outsider here, so maybe I'm missing something, but this does seem pretty ironic.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Yeah, I've been able to learn about this theme of social pressures around marriage because one of the ways that I'm learning Palestinian Arabic is I'm watching this television show kind of repeatedly because it's very good for teaching Palestinian Arabic. It's called Al-Hub Al-Hub. Have you seen this show?
No. How am I missing that now?
It has I'm not going to remember the actor's name, but it has Maisa Abdel Hadi in it.
Okay. I think I know who you're talking about.
Basically follows the careers of two careers. I'm not to professionalize marriage here, but it follows the path of two people about my age, right?
Yeah.
About our age, who are single, working their way through dating, basically. So it's a sitcom. And many of the themes that Dom covers also come up there. But I'll say this, which maybe is an important thing to say as an American who's not Arab. This show, Al-Hub Al-Hub, I watched through it the whole thing, and I was like, I'm having this feeling at the end of this, and I can't put my finger on it. What is it? And I realized it was the first time I had seen like a complete presentation of Palestinian culture, and there were no bombs. There was no discussion of the surrounding violence. It was all left implicit. And I thought, wow, wait a second. How old are you? 31. That's the first time that I've seen a piece of art presented to me from Palestine that wasn't about explosions.
Yeah.
This got me thinking about, reflecting more critically on the nature of my exposure as an American in the wake of 9/11. I mean, we're the 9/11 generation, basically, right? I was 11 when that happened. I was living in West Virginia. And it was one of the things that I think was very important for me when that happened was that one of my best friends was Lebanese. So I actually was close friends with an Arab. So I think, put it this way, sometimes when people ask me, how did you get interested in Arabic? I answer, how does anybody get interested in the things that they love, right? It's many things. But I do wonder about this early friendship, and the conflict that was created when suddenly my culture turned on him, Yeah,
it's definitely something that it's so, for me, I'm really like kind of in awe of what you're saying, because not a lot of Americans would say that sort of thing. Like it's so rare, and it's like from people that I've met and from people who have like spoken about their relation with the Middle East or with Arabs has always been somewhat of a sarcastic joke or that sort of thing. And it's not necessarily, I'm at fault too. I kind of make those jokes about my culture just to kind of, for lack of a better word, diffuse the tension in a way.
No, yeah, totally.
And it's one of those things that, like, not a lot of people that, like, as you say, have that revelation or have that moment where, like, there were so many other victims in the aftermath of that, and not even before then. I mean, it's something that's, as somebody who studied media for a long time, it's something that's been perpetuated in terms of, our political narrative or a cultural narrative. It's always been something that's been seen in a negative connotation. And like you said, when you see it in the first and foremost as something that's, a normal person, where the political aspect is just background noise. It's something that doesn't quite, like, you don't notice it because it's just, hey, they're just like everybody else. They're dealing with things that everybody else deals with, and we kind of forget that for a second. They're human.
Yeah. And I think when you realize that something like that has been true in your own life, you realize that, there's been a huge gap here in my life. It's very motivating. suddenly you're like, it's time to catch up on this. Like, I need to learn more. What other cultures have been hidden from me, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's such an important thing, especially now in this time where we're experiencing, like, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, where a lot of people have felt like the same thing. They have expressed the same kind of like, we didn't know this was going on, even though it's right in our faces the whole time. And sort of like all these different revelations that are happening. And I think it's so important that you're taking the time, you know, to really highlight that in your music and in the way that you're doing it. Speaking of which, we're gonna, like, all of this started obviously from music, our deep discussion of all of these cultural things, and it really drives from that source where is the music. And you know, you seem to have covered a bunch of songs that I love. It's like we have very much the same sort of taste, let's say. Is there, like, obviously you're probably, I'm assuming, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably working on some other songs as well.
I have kind of a short list I'm working with, for sure.
Yeah, so it's probably quite a process.
It is. They take, especially because what happened was I switched in about June from just focusing on posting small experimental clips to planning bigger projects.
Yeah.
You know, like doing a short cover of Shui versus like making the Brooklyn video. Like the Brooklyn video takes, you know, it takes months to make a video like that. But I feel that I have enough of, it's not big, but I have enough of an audience that I'm not so concerned about like constantly putting stuff up. I want to make stuff that's substantive, you know, I want to go deeper. So I have 4 other songs that I'd like to do from artists that I love. And I'm kind of moving through countries in North Africa and the Middle East. So I have a couple of songs. I might do 2, we'll see. At least 1 song from Morocco, a song by a Tunisian artist, Sabri Mosbah, who I really love. That is probably the next one that I'm gonna do. And if I think this might be a moment to point something out that I think has been maybe implicit in a lot of our conversation, which has to do with you saying we seem to have a similar taste. First of all, I think that's true. Second of all, I think there's a deeper thing there, which is a part of what I'm thinking about as I cover these songs. So why do I choose the songs that I choose? The artists that you've named, right? Whether it's Dam mixing hip hop and Arabic, or Jadal rock and Arabic, or Yasmin Hamdan electronic music and Arabic. These are artists who are already bridging things. What I've learned by starting to listen to their music and also starting to listen to their fans, who some of whom find me and start telling me they like what I'm doing and I ask them why, is that, or this is what I've started to think, there's a whole group of people, let's say in our generation, but also some in the generation above us and maybe some in the generation that's coming. I mean, I know you guys are here, Gen Z. I'm not saying you haven't arrived, but you know what? And there's a generation of people in my country about which 2 things are true. One, we actually share a lot of tastes already. We share a lot of tastes and we share values already, and we don't know it yet. This is what I realized through this project. Especially when I start to see how boldly a group like Dam takes on the challenging issues of the day that we're also taking on here, you know, whether it's feminism or whether it's human rights, including LGBT rights, or whether it's the complexity of defining an artistic identity in the context of oppression, you know? And I've thought to myself, these groups, right? I mean, first of all, the relationship between Americans and people in the Middle East and North Africa isn't just about us. The nature of our relationship has huge impact on relationships throughout the world. So it feels important to me as we think about like coming into our generation, being the people who will be in charge. I mean, right now, the big theme is fasad, right? Everybody's talking about corruption everywhere.
Yeah.
It's like, it's dizzying.
is,
It's everywhere.
It's the year of
But
facade.
it's the year of 2020, the year of facade. Yeah, وباء الفساد, right? But I think a question is, what is our generation going to do about it? And one of the things that I feel is important is that we do something about it together. Something that's true, though, is that these groups that I'm talking about, the globally minded groups who tend to be fans of Dom, let's say, and people like me in the US, we are not all of our country. You know, our countries have many different groups in them. So it seems important to me that we find a way to connect so that we can be allies in the work of unbuilding corruption, which will be part of our life's work, right? I mean, unbuilding corruption is not something that you ever get done, but you can do it better and you can do it worse.
Yeah,
and
it
we're
doesn't
next.
happen overnight.
Yeah, it doesn't happen overnight. Yeah, exactly.
But now we have a soundtrack for it, at least, you know?
Yeah,
like, they did that in Egypt, and they did that in Tunis, and
exactly.
You know, working on it in Lebanon, hopefully. There's this, that's how I essentially also got into Arabic music too, which is what I found, that a lot of these revolutions and a lot of these, because this hasn't been something that's happened like just now. This is like total buildup, and then kind of 2020 is the, like we said, the facade, whatever you want to call it at this point. But yeah, it's been a complete buildup of these things, and there have been people on the ground, and like you've been you know, building up to it. Like our generation is kind of like coming to that point where we need to understand who we are and how we're going to fight this sort of thing moving forward, because it's not going to stay this way, obviously. And these songs are always there to kind of make sense of that mess inside my head. And I think what you're doing is even more important, at least, because you're really bringing it to people who don't necessarily understand, like people who, or even to show like the Arab side, at least, who oftentimes think, okay, well, the West don't understand this. They don't know the complexity of what's going on over here, or how we're trying to fight. And all they see is that we are a violent, whatever culture. And at the end of the day, it's so refreshing to see people like yourself who see it for what it is, and the side that people are trying to portray. And I think it really ties in what you were saying before. It's such an like music and then stuff. It seems like such a, like, I don't even know how to, like, something we do for leisure, something that's fun, ends up being such an important tool for communication and for these complex stories.
I absolutely think so. And it makes me think of this interview I saw with Tamer Nafar, which brought up for me the fact, I think part of why it's so able to connect us is that even though we are divided or differentiated by very different situations, there's something universal happening. There's something that if you can get to it, you'll realize you share. There was an interview with Tamer Nafar, I think it was CNN maybe. I believe he was talking in general about trying to get Palestinians with Israeli citizenship to vote, basically, trying to get them out to the polls. And that was the overall interview. But then he said something towards the end where they asked the more personal question. I don't remember what it was. He said, I think they asked whether he thought his art was determined by his political situation. And his answer was yes and no. And then he said something that really surprised me. He said, I like to think that if I was born in Sweden, I would be telling you about what it's like to be Swedish. And I would be at the same intersections of complexity that exist in Swedish life as I am now. And I thought, yeah, it actually reminded me of an essay that I like by James Baldwin. And I know that Dom, they're big readers. They're posting stuff that they read all the time. So actually I looked it up. There's this passage. This is from an essay called everybody's protest novel. See, I just am a researcher. I mean, it's like this is what I do.
Fair enough.
So this is an essay called Everybody's Protest Novel, where Baldwin is talking about protest music or protest literature in America. And he makes a more general comment about art. He says, "We have, as it seems to me, in this most mechanical and interlocking of civilizations, attempted to lop the human being down to the status of a time-saving invention. He is not, after all, merely a member of a society or a group, or a deplorable conundrum to be explained by science. He is, and how old-fashioned the words sound, something more than that, something resolutely indefinable, unpredictable. In overlooking, denying, evading his complexity, which is nothing more than the disquieting complexity of ourselves, we are diminished and we perish. Only within this web of ambiguity, paradox, this hunger, danger, darkness, can we find at once ourselves and the power that will free us from ourselves. It is this power of revelation which is the business of the novelist," says Baldwin, but I think the same can be said of music. And I think it's already true of Dom's music.
That's for
And
sure. I mean,
yeah, that's my interpretation of Tamar Nafar saying, if I was born in Sweden, you better believe I would be the Swedish rapper telling you about life in Sweden.
His issues. I mean, I think if something to be said about Tamer, he really does know how to sort of hit the nail on the head, so to speak. Like, he really gets it in a way that I don't think anybody has. Like, every time I try to say things, even now, like, I can think of references to his songs where he would say it just exactly the way it should be, and I'm just going to be fumbling here with my words. And I think the thing that he's talking about is, like, essentially our identity as Palestinians, as Arabs, is so politicized that a lot of the times people miss completely the fact that, you know, we're dealing with social issues just like everybody else on this planet and everyone else. And the simple fact of, like, going to vote over here is such a big issue. And for him to kind of step out and be like, hey, you guys should go vote. This is our civic duty. It's an important thing to do. He got a lot of backlash from that.
I noticed that. Yeah.
Which was, I didn't get it, obviously, but I kind of understand where people are coming from at the same time, living here and being one of the, you know, having to deal with this sort of corruption that's also happening here a lot of the times, where we're not represented in our governments and we're not, you know, our voice isn't being heard as prominently as that of our Jewish counterparts. I mean, it's a reality that not a lot of people want to face or want to talk about. And even me saying that, which is a fact, which is something that a lot of times can be misconstrued as political. And I don't think it's political at all. I think a lot of time people just forget the fact that we are also people with a culture and a narrative, and people take advantage of that a lot of the time and sort of shift it to the politics, which is something that's happening all over the world. And that in of itself you think would connect people, but it doesn't.
Yeah, because those political narratives are inevitably oversimplified, and connection happens in details. This is what I think. This came up in a big way in one of the most challenging aspects of Brooklyn, which was translating it. Because originally I wasn't going to translate it. I was just going to throw it up there, no subtitles. But I was I worked with a local Palestinian American restaurant, and one of the members of that community co-directed with me the scene at Zaytoons, the scene involving the makhlouba and the kind of dance. Yeah. So in getting to know him more, you know, he's a Palestinian American, I realized, oh, if I don't put subtitles, there are going to be a lot of Palestinian Americans who don't know what's being said, because I can't assume that everybody speaks Arabic. And it's not going to reach Americans, right, who don't speak Arabic. So I thought, okay, I need to translate this. I went to Dom's website. I looked at the translation they have there. It's fine, but I was worried that if I just used that translation, people, number one, wouldn't recognize that it's poetry. right? Because in Arabic, it's very poetic. I didn't feel that the translation, it was more of a prose translation on the website. So I wanted to translate in a way that was more poetic, which is why I open with, when it's like, Suhail's like, أسبوع كله مع الأهالي والأصحاب ودعت كل شبر بحي البلاد. And my translation of that is, all week long with me and mine, it's long goodbyes in Palestine. Because I want people to feel the way those two lines are woven together by the idea of length and distance, because this is a theme that comes up in the song. So there were poetic challenges like that one, but the biggest challenge was not the Arabic in the translation. It was how to find the point of balance in translating the lines that could be construed as the most political. And there are two of them in the song. It's when he's talking about the situation that his wife, Jackie's in, who you've met. So you know, it's cool that you know the people involved. Yeah, so the line in the song is, مستحيل يعطوها جنسية, right? And it's not a difficult line in Arabic. We could translate it as, you know, there's no way they'll give her citizenship. But what I was worried about was the they. Because when you translate something, you have to pick an audience, right? And the audience I have in mind is Americans in the middle. But anyway, what I was worried about with this line, مستحيل يعطوها جنسية, was that if I translated as they will never give her citizenship, it would be very easy to spin what Suhail is saying there as a kind of like predictable anti-Israel statement from a Palestinian, the they, right? And I thought that doesn't work because he's telling a specific story. And so if I let it hang vaguely like that, a certain number of people will just hear it wrong, you know, on my interpretation. So what did I have to do? Well, I had to try to figure out what he was referring to, right? Why is it that Jackie can't get citizenship? I knew that the members of Dam were Israeli citizens. So I had that as a starting place. So I started researching Israeli marriage law regarding Palestinians. And I was like, what is the situation here? And it turns out there's a specific law since, you know, that was passed shortly after 9/11, 2003, that creates this painful exception for Palestinians, which is that if you are a Palestinian with Israeli citizenship and you marry somebody who's Palestinian and doesn't have Israeli citizenship, they won't be given citizenship or residency. And, you know, originally the idea was, there's all kinds of ideas why they did that, but originally it was supposed to be a temporary law. Well, Suhail's trying to get married more recently and it's still there. And so I started looking at if there were other testimonies of this, and there is another testimony of this on the internet by this woman who calls herself Forat. She is an American Israeli woman who married a Palestinian man. And she blogs about what that's like. And one of the blog posts is about it's about the fact that he can't get residency or citizenship. And so she applies for emergency humanitarian exception. And it takes years to be processed. And she narrates the process. And the exception is temporary. So she throws up her hands like Suhail and she says, there's no real option here, right? We can't. This is a true wall. So when thinking about the translation, مستحيل يعطوها جنسية, I decided it would be better to be concrete. And so I said, a law denies her citizenship. Because Americans we care about laws that deny things. we don't like that. That's actually something that a lot of Americans share, is we don't, and in particular, we care about marriage laws, right? We are familiar with fighting legal battles around marriage laws. So I thought, okay, what I hope will happen is, if I translate this as a law denies her citizenship, some Americans will say, which law? And then they'll go look it up. And then they'll know something concrete. So that was to me, that's an example of you have to be artistic even about finding the point of balance between the political and the personal. Because if you get swept into the predictable political complaints on either side, you get lost.
Definitely. I think that is such an important point to bring up, because I don't think a lot of people, even Arabs, by the way, would have picked up on that. Like, as you're saying that now, I'm just like, what how did I not see that? And it's such an important thing, because I know people like Jackie and Sohail, like they're not just one story that kind of blends into sort of, you know, fabric of things, but there are so many people that are dealing with these issues. And like you said, it's not a matter of, oh, the big bad guy here in the story, but it's literally a law, and it kind of like sheds light. And it's like knowing your audience, like you said, like you want to shed light on this, and it's just a brilliant way to do that, and it's a good interpretation of it, at least.
Well, I can tell you a couple things happened in Brooklyn, just in terms of finding that point of balance between how to tell Suhail's story, which is also many other people's stories, as you said. And I found this out too, because I started to talk about Brooklyn with Palestinians, and almost everybody was like, I know somebody who's in that situation. So I realized this was not a rare thing. One thing was how to understand Suhail is coming from Lyd to Brooklyn. So basically from Lyd to Palestinian American culture in some sense. How do I make sense of my place, since I've never been to Lyd? And the basic idea in the Brooklyn video was, I'm an American, kind of like you were saying, in a different way, opposite, coming to Palestinian American culture. And that's why we meet in the restaurant. So the song's narrative and my narrative converge in the restaurant, which is when I start changing the lyrics at the end of the song to talk to Suhail directly. Because at the end of the song, in the original, there's a kind of chorus. And instead of doing that chorus, I put a little bit of my own. It's actually the first time that I guess it's the first time I've written anything in Arabic in a song, that I felt that there needed to be a direct moment where I talked to the teller of this story. And then right after that, we switched to English. Because as I was covering this song, this other song that I was writing just kept coming, just writing on a different, I was writing it kind of separately, but it kept coming to mind. And I was like, this is weird. I had no plan to do a mashup, but I was in my kitchen, like in front of Ableton. I had just gotten back from a run around Prospect Park. And suddenly I was like, I just sang Where My Home Is into the Ableton session where Brooklyn was. Without, like, I was like, no judgment, let's just do this because it keeps coming up. And it just worked. And I thought, I need to do these two together. The themes are together, the stories are connected. And so that is how I got from finishing Suhail's story about arriving in Brooklyn to an Americana song about where one's home is. Because writing that song was inspired by Brooklyn, right? It was inspired in particular by that line, Beiti hu al-Kon, right? Where he's talking, which is such a bittersweet line in the original song. Mm-hmm. To me, it's like, it's a real moment of growth and expansion, right? And it's also sad, you know, because with our homes, we want them to be more particular than the universe, right? Home is about something that's closer than the stars.
A specific place, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was how that happened. It was really, I felt that line of Suhail's go in very deep, and then I started writing this other song that I thought was separate, but then it turned out to be part of this song. Wow. And it presented another challenge around translation, because we switched to English, and then I thought, well, if I'm going to be subtitling this whole thing when I'm singing in Arabic and English, if I switch to English, I need to switch the subtitles to Arabic. Like that's if we're going to talk about bridging, like there's no excuse for doing that. So then, as you know, translating into a language that you're learning is harder than translating from a language to your own language. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to translate this line, if I say home is, you say where my home is. And what I immediately noticed about it is this kind of call and response. If I say home is, you say where my home is. This is a part of many American musical traditions. It's kind of like, the image of it is, somebody's on stage. If I say home is, you say where my home is, right? It's call and response. But if you translate that literally into Arabic, you lose it, because in that musical context, if I say home is, you say where my home is, we're all imagining a third audience that we're telling that to. Does that make sense? That's what's going on there. So it's not about you telling me the thing that I just said. It's about us together saying it to somebody else, which is why in the Arabic, I wanted to use the third person, right? إن سألكم عن بيتنا قولوا بيتنا حيثما كنا. Because it's a question of telling somebody else, right? If they ask you about our home, tell them our home is where, and here I love the ambiguity of the way conditions work in Arabic. It worked really well. Kunna, because with haythuma, it could be, home is wherever we are, but it's also wherever we were, which has a certain resonance when we're talking about people having to leave their homes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it was amidst all of this, people were holding up signs. I think it was maybe Sarkhet Ahlam. I think it was during those protests.
Yeah.
And I was seeing people hold up signs in the Arab world. And I thought, as I translate this, let's think about a sign, because a sign is the kind of thing you show somebody else, So that was how we got to In Sa'alukum an Baytna. And my Arabic teacher, Hassan al-Dahabi, helped me with that, because I'm not a poet in Arabic. I arrived with a rough translation and a sense of how to translate it. And he was like, let's give this let's get it to work as a poem, as a couplet in Arabic. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which it was amazing. Yeah.
I'm in awe of everything you just said. It's just really it's unbelievable. I don't think somebody who is of the Arab culture would go to the lengths that you did to create this really great cover that works on all the levels. I think that anybody listening to it will really understand the time and the effort you put into it. The work that you're doing is, just like I said, really, really great. يعني يعطيك العافية, as we say. And
yeah.
I don't know what else to tell you.
ألبوم جديد وبس سجلت أكم من بار وبالقوة. جيل جديد بالعالم جاي وأكيد حيعرف من انتو. شو سوى الميم سليمان الأغنى فقير وشو سوى. 5 سنين في نيويورك وبعدنا بعدين في شوارعها. بس يلا مش مشكلة، ما أنت في وطنك مضايع وفي غربة ضايع وما حد بيعرف الحال. بس عمري 31 سنة وأنا في رحلة معك. Every day is a journey and the journey itself is home. بيتنا هو الكون. If I say home is, you say where my home is. You say where my home is. You say where my home. If I say home is, you say where my home is. You say where my home is. You say where my home. If I say home is, you say where my home is. You say where my home is. You say where my home. If I say home is, you say where my home is. You say where my home is. You say where my home. Yalla, zid, zid. If I say home is, you say where my home is. You say where my home is. You say where my home. If I say home is, you say where my home is. You say where my home is. You say where my home. If I say home is, you say where my home is. You say where my home is. You say where my home. If I say home is, you say where my home is. You say where my